My dad paid for both my stepsisters to get college degrees but told me, "You're a man, work it out yourself." So I did. I built everything without him. Now 12 years later, he's sitting in my office asking for a favor. They taught me a harsh lesson: loyalty is conditional, and some debts can only be paid in cold, hard truth. But they never imagined I'd come back to collect what was owed, with interest. Our house, nestled in a quiet cul-de-sac in suburban Dallas, always projected an image of flawless suburban bliss. White picket fence, manicured lawn, the kind of place where nothing bad ever happened. But beneath that veneer, a different story unfolded, one soaked in silent judgment and calculated neglect. My name is Ethan. I'm 29 now, but this story begins when I was just 17. That's the year I stopped asking my father for anything. If life has taught me anything, it's that people will always show you exactly who they are, if you're patient enough to truly watch. And my father? He laid it all out for me, plain as day, long before I ever reached adulthood. My mother passed away when I was 9. A gaping, raw wound that never quite healed. Within 2 short years, my father had remarried. Her name was Brenda. She was a woman whose eyes rarely met mine, unless it was to criticize, to correct, or to simply find fault. With Brenda came Chloe and Olivia, my new stepsisters. They were roughly my age, but their presence in our home quickly relegated me to the status of a tolerated house pet, constantly on the verge of outstaying its welcome. At first, I tried so hard to fit in. I really did. I was that kid who genuinely believed if I just worked harder, if I earned impeccable grades, if I remained polite and invisible, they would eventually accept me. But slowly, the stark imbalance became impossible to ignore. Christmases would arrive, and Chloe would unwrap the latest iPhone, while I received a worn, secondhand sweater. Dinners often featured meals Brenda knew I was allergic to, and when I couldn't eat, I'd be told I was too sensitive. Family vacations were often planned with just enough room for the 4 of them, leaving me to spend a lonely week with my grandmother. Still, none of that prepared me for what happened the summer before my senior year. College wasn't some lofty dream for me, it was my one-way ticket out. I pored over scholarship applications, devoured SAT prep books, and joined clubs I couldn't care less about, purely to bolster my chances. I figured, even if my father wasn't the most affectionate man, he'd at least help with some of the cost. After all, he owned a local construction company, with 3 big trucks proudly displaying his name, and seemed to always be hiring. So, when Chloe, a year older than me, got accepted into a private university across the country, I didn't think much of it. She wasn't exactly the academic type, but she somehow landed a spot in some communications program that probably cost more than our house's down payment. My father threw her a massive party. I remember standing in the backyard, watching him proudly hand her a check in front of everyone, declaring, "My little girl is going to conquer the world." I clapped. I smiled. I even stayed to help clean up. Then came Olivia. She was my age, just a few months younger, but everything always seemed to effortlessly fall into place for her. She chose a state school nearby, gaining admission with perfectly average grades. My father personally helped her move into her dorm, furnished her room, and even upgraded her laptop, insisting she'd need it for her studies. When my turn finally arrived, I sat down with him one night after dinner. It was excruciatingly awkward. He was absorbed in some home improvement show, and I kept glancing at the screen, feeling like an intruder disrupting a sacred ritual. I cleared my throat. "Hey, I've been accepted into 2 schools," I began, my voice a little too quiet. "One has an amazing engineering program. I just wanted to talk about what kind of help I could get from you, maybe even partial. I can cover the rest with loans." He didn't even mute the TV. He just turned to me, his expression devoid of anger or annoyance, just flat, as if he were reading the daily weather report. "You're a man now, Ethan. You need to figure it out for yourself." At first, I thought he was joking. I laughed, a nervous, hollow sound. "No, really." But he didn't blink. "Chloe and Olivia are girls. They'll get married and settle down. You've got to make your own way. That's how the world works. I stared at him for what felt like an eternity, trying to process his words. My heart did this strange, heavy thud in my chest. Not from anger, not yet, but from a devastating realization I had been living in someone else's house this entire time. Not a home, not a family, just a roof under which I paid rent in silence and obedience. I didn't argue. What was the point? That night, I went to my room, closed the door, and didn't sleep. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to reconcile how two girls, not even biologically his, could be showered with such lavish support, while I, his only son, was told to sink or swim. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into finding a way out. I applied for every scholarship, every grant, every side job I could manage. I decided to take a gap year, purely to save money. I worked at a mechanic's garage by day and stocked shelves at a grocery store by night. No one in that house noticed. Or if they did, they simply didn't care. Brenda still asked me to take out the trash, as if I were some mooch sleeping on her couch. Chloe would come home on breaks, acting like royalty. Olivia got a brand new car from my father the summer after her freshman year, so she wouldn't have to rely on campus shuttles. Me? I was biking to both jobs on a rusted mountain bike I'd bought off Craigslist. And yet, even then, I didn't hate them. Not yet. I just accepted it. I told myself, maybe this is just how things are. Maybe life was simply dealing me a rough hand, and I had to play it smart. But that changed one afternoon, 2 years later. I came home early from work and overheard a conversation drifting from the kitchen. My father was talking to Brenda. I paused in the hallway, out of sight, just about to walk in when I heard my name. He's stubborn, that's for sure, my father was saying. But I think it's good for him. Builds character. Brenda snorted. You really think he'll make something of himself? And my father, the very man who helped two girls, not related to him by blood, chase their dreams without hesitation, chuckled and said, Nah. He'll be back here in a few years, begging for a job. You'll see. I froze right there, barely 5 feet away, hearing my own father bet on my failure as if it were an inevitable outcome. As if I were some long-shot horse in a race no one even bothered to watch. I don't remember walking to my room. I don't remember what I did that night. But something shifted inside me. Something cold. Quiet. And sharp. I stopped trying to be seen. I stopped hoping for validation. From that moment on, everything I did for me. I enrolled in community college the next semester. I took classes while still juggling both jobs. 2 years later, I transferred to a university with a full-ride scholarship. I studied business with a minor in mechanical engineering. I started freelancing. I built a small app that helped local shops manage their inventory. It took off far more than I ever expected. I secured investors, transformed it into a real company, grew it, and eventually sold it. Then I started another. By the time I was 28, I wasn't just rich, but truly stable, comfortable. I owned my own house, my own car, my own future. I had an office downtown with a breathtaking view of the Dallas skyline and 10 employees whose lives I was proud to support. I even got featured in a local business magazine. And that's how he found me. 12 years after that night in the kitchen, I heard a soft knock on my office door. My assistant, Ela, popped her head in. Hey, Ethan, there's someone here asking to speak with you. Says he's your father. Just like that, I looked up. And there he was, worn suit, nervous smile. A man who once spoke with unshakable authority, now clutching a battered baseball cap in his hands, as if he were the one asking for permission. Hey, Ethan, he said, his voice a little strained. Mind if I come in? I need a favor. And that, my friends, is where things got really interesting. I didn't say anything at first. I just stared at him. My father, standing in the doorway of my office like a stranger who had taken a wrong turn. His eyes scanned the room, wide with a disbelief that suggested he expected me to be in some shared workspace or a rundown garage office with a flickering light bulb and a rusty coffee pot. But no, behind me was a glass wall showcasing the amber hues of a late afternoon city. On the walls hung framed patents and press features. I'd recently even received an entrepreneur award, something that meant little to me, but clearly impressed the investors and clients who walked through these doors. And now he stood there, next to a water cooler with sparkling and still options, acting as if we just bumped into each other at the grocery store. "Ethan," he repeated, softer this time, as if perhaps I hadn't heard him. "I was hoping we could talk." I glanced at Ela, who was lingering in the hallway, unsure if she should intervene. I gave her the smallest nod.
"Yeah,
"It's fine." She reluctantly returned to her desk. My father stepped inside, almost gingerly, as if unsure if his feet would be welcomed by the polished floor. He kept glancing around, a half-smile playing on his lips, as if he wanted to express pride, but knew better than to speak first. I gestured to the chair across from my desk. He sat. For a long time, I just let the silence hang. I wanted him to feel it. The crushing weight of every year he wasn't there. Every birthday he forgot. Every Christmas card that simply said, "Happy Holidays," with no personal note. Every time I sat alone watching Olivia unwrap a new tablet while I quietly pocketed a $25 gas card. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "You've got quite the place here," he offered. I finally spoke, my voice steady. "You didn't come here for a tour." He cleared his throat and nodded, rubbing the back of his neck, a familiar gesture he always made when he was about to ask for something.
"Yeah,
"No, you're right. I need a favor." Of course, he did. "You remember my company?" "The construction one," he asked, already knowing I did. "Things haven't been great. Had to let a bunch of guys go last year. Economy hit us hard. Materials went up. Clients backed out. Insurance got messy. We're in a tough spot." I didn't say anything. He pushed forward. "We're not asking for a handout, just a bridge loan, something to keep the doors open until we stabilize. You know the business. We've still got good bones. We just need a little boost." I should have said no right then. But I didn't. Not because I felt guilty. Not because I cared. But because something in me wanted to hear more, wanted to see how far he would go. I leaned back in my chair and asked, "How much?" His eyes lit up, as if that simple question meant he had a chance. 50, maybe 60,000. I almost laughed. Not because the number was ridiculous, I could have written a check that afternoon, but because the audacity of it was. "You're asking me for $60,000, I said slowly, letting each word hang in the air, when you wouldn't even co-sign a $5,000 student loan 12 years ago? His smile faltered. "That was different. You needed to learn to stand on your own 2 feet. I was trying to raise a man, weren't I?" He hesitated, visibly shaken. "I didn't mean it like that. Look, maybe I wasn't perfect, but..." "No, you were clear," I interrupted, my voice sharper now. "You told me I had to figure it out myself because I was a man. And I did. I figured out every scholarship, every job, every night class, every couch I slept on when I couldn't afford rent. I built everything you see here without a single cent from you." He looked down. "I know." "No, I don't think you do," I snapped. Because while I was working triple shifts and studying on my breaks, Chloe was partying on your dime and failing her classes. Olivia got a second car while I was patching a bike tire with duct tape. His jaw tightened. "That's not fair. Isn't it?" I asked, a dangerous calm in my voice. Because to me, it sounds exactly like what happened. He had no response. And that should have been the end of it. That should have been the final nail. But the truth is, the worst part, the real, gut-wrenching betrayal, had happened years earlier. And maybe I should have seen it coming. But back then, I was too tired, too numb, too busy simply surviving to understand how deep the favoritism truly went. It began with something small. About 6 months after I started community college, I stopped by the house to grab a few boxes I'd left in the garage. I hadn't been around much, and that was by design. Brenda wasn't home that day, and Chloe was back at school, so I figured I could slip in and out unnoticed. While digging through the boxes, I found a manila folder, stuffed between an old toolbox and a broken fan. Curiosity, that persistent little demon, got the better of me. I opened it. Inside were copies of tuition invoices. Not mine, obviously. Chloe's. Olivia's. But what caught my eye was the meticulous breakdown: room and board, textbook fees, meal plans. And then, at the bottom, in messy handwriting, were notes: paid 6/5, paid in full, Dad covered, Chloe needs extra for summer session. And then a receipt, a single sheet from a bank I didn't recognize, with my father's name and Brenda's listed jointly. A wire transfer for $35,000. I stared at that number for a long time. I didn't even realize my hands were shaking until I dropped the folder and half the papers scattered across the floor. That was the moment I understood. This wasn't about tough love. This wasn't about raising me to be strong. This was about choosing. He didn't forget me. He didn't push me to be independent. He just picked them over me, every single time. The bitterness settled in my stomach like a stone. But I said nothing. I took my boxes and left. Fast forward a year. Chloe dropped out of school. No grand announcement, just a quiet return home. A few vague excuses about changing majors and mental burnout. My father spun it into some story about her being brave enough to try something new. Meanwhile, I was at university now, living in a crumbling off-campus apartment with a mold problem and no heating in the winter. I had 3 roommates, 2 jobs, and 6 classes. And still, I'd get texts from Brenda: "Can you come by this weekend? Chloe needs help setting up her Etsy shop." Or, "We're having a family dinner. Don't be rude and skip it." The worst was the Christmas right before my senior year. I didn't want to go home. Everything about that house felt wrong, but I hadn't seen my grandmother in months, and she was the only one who ever made me feel like I mattered, so I went. Dinner was awkward. Chloe had dyed her hair neon pink and was ranting about toxic corporate systems, while Olivia live tweeted the meal. My father was quiet most of the night, sipping his beer, pretending like we were all one big, happy family. Then, after dessert, he cleared his throat and tapped his glass. "I've got a little announcement," he said, beaming. "Nothing huge, just a little early gift." He reached under the table and pulled out 2 small boxes, wrapped in silver paper with neat little bows. Olivia shrieked. Chloe clapped like a seal. They opened them in sync. Inside? Keys to brand new cars. I remember sitting there, holding a paper plate with a half-eaten slice of pumpkin pie, thinking this had to be some kind of sick joke. "They're used," my father said quickly, as if that would make it better, "but good condition, safe, reliable." Everyone cheered, except me. I stood up, left my plate on the table, and walked out without a word. No one followed me. No one called. A week later, I received an email from Olivia, forwarded by accident. It was a thread between her and my father, discussing the specs of her new car and how Ethan was probably just jealous because he never learned to save properly. That was the breaking point. That's when something inside me snapped. The final thread of hope I'd been clinging to, the idea that maybe one day he'd realize what he'd done, finally dissolved. I deleted their numbers, blocked Brenda on social media, stopped replying to group invites, birthday messages, and fake attempts at connection. I shut the door and locked it behind me. Until now. Until this very moment, 12 years later, with my father sitting across from me, suddenly humble, suddenly quiet, asking me for help. "Please, Ethan," he said, his voice low. "I wouldn't be here if I had another choice." I looked at him for a long time. And just when he thought I might say yes, there was another knock on my door. "Hey, Ethan," Ela peeked in, hesitating. "There's someone else here to see you. Says her name is Olivia." I froze. And then, slowly, a smile touched my lips. I knew exactly what this was about. I hadn't seen Olivia in nearly 7 years. Not since that Christmas with the car keys and the awkward silence I left in my place at the table. Not since I deleted their numbers and erased that part of my life like a corrupted file on an old hard drive. So when Ela said her name, something cold settled deep inside me. My father stiffened in the chair across from me. "She's here," he asked, confused, and then quickly masked it with a nervous chuckle. Probably just wanted to come along, show support. Support? Right. I stood and walked to the door without saying a word. When I opened it, there she was. Same carefully curated face, same posture that suggested the world owed her a little more room than it gave everyone else. But there were new lines under her eyes now. Slight bags no concealer could fully hide. She wore a beige coat draped over one arm and clutched her phone like a shield. "Ethan," she said, almost as if she were surprised to see me, as if she hadn't just walked directly into my office. "Olivia," I replied, stepping aside. She entered slowly, scanning the room like she was trying to gauge how much success I'd accumulated and whether it could be measured in square footage or decor. Her gaze flicked from the plaque on the wall to the designer chair by the window. She gave a short nod, then sat beside my father without waiting for an invitation. "Long time," she said, folding one leg over the other. I didn't respond. She glanced at my father. "He told you, right? About the business?" I raised an eyebrow. "Is that why you're here? To pitch me, too?" "No," she said, but her voice wavered. "Well, kind of. But not just for that. We know things between us haven't been smooth." I leaned against the edge of my desk, arms crossed. "Smooth." My father opened his mouth as if to jump in, but Olivia shot him a look, and he backed down. I watched it all with a strange, detached calm, like I was watching a play I'd already seen the ending to. "We just thought," she started again, "maybe it's time to put the past behind us. Life's too short, right?" It was such a hallmark line. Scripted. Practiced. And utterly insincere. "What do you want?" I asked, cutting to the chase. She hesitated, then finally laid it all out. The construction company was deeper in the red than my father had admitted. Turns out a few bad contracts, some lingering tax issues, and truly poor planning had left them on the brink. They'd mortgaged their house, liquidated savings, even took out loans in Brenda's name, and now creditors were circling like vultures. "We could lose everything," she said, her voice trembling now, the veneer finally cracking. "Dad could lose his house. Chloe's still living there with her kids. Mom's freaking out. It's bad, Ethan." I stared at her for a moment, and then at my father. He couldn't even meet my eyes. "She's living there?" I asked. "Chloe with her kids?" My father nodded. "Barely. She's going through a tough time." "So, let me get this straight," I said slowly. "The daughter who dropped out, never held a steady job, and had her tuition gift wrapped for her, she's still in the house you mortgaged, while you're sitting here asking me for money to bail you out? Ethan, don't do this." Olivia snapped, her calm mask shattering for a moment. "This isn't about who got what years ago. This is about family, and right now our family's drowning." "Our family?" I repeated. "Is it though?" Silence. That was the precise moment I realized they hadn't come here for reconciliation. They'd come because the well had dried up everywhere else. And now, I was the last faucet with a steady flow. And yet, despite everything, despite the years of bitterness I'd buried, I still remembered what it felt like to hit rock bottom. Because I had hit it once. It was after my second year at university. I'd overestimated my summer income, underestimated tuition hikes, and the scholarship I was promised got reduced due to budget constraints. I appealed, begged, filled out 100 more forms, but the answer was the same. I was $4,800 short. I didn't have it. My 2 part-time jobs barely covered rent and food. My roommate was moving out, and I couldn't afford the place alone. I couldn't get a cosigner, couldn't qualify for a loan. I was a week away from being dropped from classes. I remember sitting in a dingy diner, staring at my cold coffee, utterly lost. I didn't cry. I didn't even frown. I just sat there thinking, so, this is it, huh? I made it this far just to lose it now. I had no family to call. No backup plan. No safety net. That night, I slept in the back of my car. It was June, hot, mosquitoes buzzing through a cracked window, the seatbelt digging into my side. I used my backpack as a pillow and my hoodie as a blanket. And I remember thinking, I'll never forget this. No matter what happens later, no matter how far I climb, I will never forget this night. It was the turning point. The next morning, I dragged myself to the student union and offered to tutor calculus, physics, economics, anything I could. I talked to the department head, pitched a work-study program, offered to sweep floors if that's what it took. I started freelancing online, making logos and basic websites for anyone willing to pay $25. For months, I lived off canned soup and tap water. I learned how to stretch $1 so far it snapped. But I stayed in school. I finished that semester. And the next. And the next. Eventually, one of my freelance projects, a basic inventory tracker for a student-run coffee kiosk, got picked up by a local chain. They offered me a contract to build a more advanced version. That contract led to others. I learned to code properly, took night classes, grew my portfolio. By the time I graduated, I had enough clients to go full-time. I rented a tiny office above a dry cleaner and hired my first intern. That was the rise. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't fast. But it was mine. Every inch of it earned, every win paid for in sleepless nights and quiet resilience. So now, sitting in my sleek office, watching the two people who once watched me drown without lifting a hand. Now they were gasping for air, and they wanted me to be the life raft. Why now? I asked Olivia finally. Why come here after all this time? She hesitated, then said something so audacious it almost made me laugh. Because you owe us. I blinked. What? You're successful because of us, she said, her voice rising. You wouldn't have pushed yourself so hard if we hadn't, if things hadn't been the way they were. That pressure made you. Dad was tough.
Yeah.
But it turned you into this. She gestured around the office like it was part of her argument. My father nodded slowly. She's right. I may not have done things perfectly, but I gave you the push you needed. You're strong because of it. That's got to mean something. I stared at them in disbelief. And then, slowly, I smiled. Not because it was funny, but because I'd finally seen the full, ugly picture. They weren't just entitled. They were delusional. They truly believed that abandoning me had been a gift. That letting me suffer was some twisted version of love. That they had a claim to my success. Like it was equity in a stock they'd invested in. I stood. This meeting is over. Olivia's face dropped. Ethan, don't. My father stood too. Just think about it, please. I opened the door. Neither moved at first, but then Olivia grabbed her coat and stormed past me without another word. My father lingered for a moment. I know I made mistakes, he said quietly, his voice hollow. But I'm still your father. I looked him dead in the eye. No, you're not. And I closed the door behind them. I sat in my office for a long time afterward, lights off, the city glowing in the distance. My heart wasn't racing. I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad. I was clear. Crystal clear. And I knew exactly what I was going to do next. But not for them. Not this time. I didn't tell anyone what happened that day. Not Ela, my assistant, not my COO, not even Leo, my closest friend and unofficial business partner since college. But I thought about it constantly. It wasn't just the nerve they had, walking into my office like I was still some confused teenager asking for scraps. It was the entitlement, the sheer gall to suggest they made me. As if neglect and favoritism were the ingredients to my success, as if watching me drown had been part of the plan all along. And yet, I couldn't stop replaying Olivia's face, the crack in her voice, the desperation she tried so hard to mask with forced grace. She had always been good at that, putting on a polished, well-adjusted image while things fell apart behind the curtain. But the curtain had finally dropped. They were losing everything. The house, the business, whatever illusion of control they'd built was crumbling, and I had a front row seat to the collapse. I'll admit it, I liked the view. But revenge, I've learned, isn't about lashing out. Not for people like me. Not when you've spent your whole life being told to figure it out on your own. No, revenge is a long game, a slow, deliberate strategy, like chess. You don't flip the board when you're angry. You study the position. You tighten the noose one square at a time. And I had just spotted my opening. 2 days later, I scheduled a meeting with Leo. He met me at our usual cafe, this quiet spot tucked between 2 office buildings with the best cold brew in the city and a staff who didn't blink if you stayed for 3 hours on a single espresso. Leo was early, laptop open, already nursing his drink. He was tall, sharp-jawed, always wearing something halfway between streetwear and startup chic. One of those rare people who could be both brutally honest and completely loyal at the same time. "What's up?" he asked as I sat down. "You've had that calculating vengeance look all week." I gave a dry laugh. "Do I have a look for that?" "You do," he said. "And you've been quiet, which means either someone's about to regret everything or you've finally lost interest in your inbox." I took a sip of my coffee. Then I told him everything, about the visit, the ask, the smug entitlement. Olivia's line about me owing them for pushing me. My father's desperate pitch about the company. Leo didn't interrupt, just listened, brow furrowed slightly, nodding every few minutes. When I finished, he leaned back, whistling under his breath. "Man," he said. "That's rich. Do they even know what we're sitting on?" "No," I replied. "And I don't plan on telling them. Not yet, because here's the thing. We had just closed our Series B round, $15 million. Our startup, now a fast-growing logistics optimization company, wasn't just surviving anymore. We were scaling fast. Contracts with retail giants. A proprietary AI system that could reduce supply chain waste by 30%. Industry awards. We were on track for a massive acquisition within 18 months. And I'd made sure none of it led back to my legal name in public-facing press. Every article used Leo as the public face. I was the architect behind the curtain. Deliberate. Strategic. Because I didn't want my family crawling out of the woodwork with crocodile tears and sob stories. But now they'd found me anyway, and they were drowning. So I made a decision. I want to buy them out, I told Leo. He raised an eyebrow. Buy them out of what? The construction company. He blinked. You want to buy your dad's failing business? Exactly. He leaned forward. Okay, I'm listening, but I need to hear where this is going. I opened my laptop and pulled up the public business registry. I'd already done the research. The company was bleeding, 6 months behind on taxes, massive debt owed to a materials supplier, pending lawsuits over unpaid wages. The building they owned had been used as collateral for multiple loans. Brenda's name was co-signed on at least 2 of them. They don't know I know all this, I said. And that's the point. Leo's eyes gleamed. You're going to make them an offer. Exactly. But not as Ethan, not as their son. I'm going to approach them through a holding company. A shell, essentially. Clean name, no personal connection, just a local investor with an interest in flipping undervalued family businesses. And what's the end game? He asked, though I could already see the grin forming at the corners of his mouth. I take control of everything. The company, the property, their assets. I become the owner of the very thing my father clung to like a crown. I paused. And then I show him what a real man does with power. Leo let out a low whistle. That's cold, Ethan, but I like it. We spent the next 2 hours mapping out the plan. First, we registered a new LLC under Leo's name, Redbridge Holdings. Completely legitimate, with its own business email domain, voicemail inbox, and a polished website designed to look like a boutique equity firm specializing in distressed family businesses. Then we drafted a letter of interest, casually inquiring about buying out the construction company. No hard pitch, just a gentle, "We noticed you may be in need of assistance" approach. We made it sound like a lifeline, not a hostile takeover. A fresh start. We mailed it. 2 weeks later, we got a response. They wanted to meet. I arranged for the meeting to be held at a neutral, downtown co-working space, one of those glass and steel buildings with Scandinavian furniture and kombucha on tap. I didn't attend. Leo handled it, dressed in his best investor casual, black button-down, slim-fit slacks, his Rolex just peeking from under the cuff. He said they looked uncomfortable. Brenda was there, too. First time she'd shown her face since my high school graduation. According to Leo, she spent most of the meeting cutting him off, trying to seem smarter than she was. My father, meanwhile, was quiet, nervous, probably sensing they were in deeper than he'd admitted. They said they'd think about it. 3 days later, they called back. They were interested in selling 51% to retain family control. We countered with 70%. They argued. We stood firm. Eventually, they caved. The documents were signed 2 weeks later. I owned the majority stake in the company that once shut its doors on me, and they still had no idea. The first thing I did was audit the books. It was worse than expected. They'd taken personal loans through the business, used the company credit card for vacations, paid Chloe under the table for consulting. Olivia's name was on the payroll, despite not having worked there in years. We fired their accountant, installed our own. I replaced the old foreman with a competent project manager I'd worked with during a previous logistics project. He knew construction inside and out. We cleaned house, streamlined operations, cut the dead weight. Chloe stopped showing up entirely when we removed her access to the company gas card. Olivia called Leo directly, furious, demanding answers. He told her politely that the new owners were restructuring. That's when she threatened legal action, claiming emotional damages. It was laughable. But the real surprise came a few weeks later. A letter from the county. Brenda had put the house up as collateral, not once, but twice. One of the liens had defaulted, and now, unless someone cleared the debt, foreclosure proceedings would begin within 60 days. And the funniest part? One of the liens was technically under the business's name, which meant I now had legal leverage over their house. Poetic. I kept quiet for a while, let it simmer, let the panic start to rise, let the silence from Redbridge Holdings unnerve them. And then, one rainy Thursday morning, I scheduled a meeting. This time, it would be in my office. Same chairs, same skyline, same manila folders with financial documents spread across the desk. But this time, I wouldn't be alone. Leo would be there, and our legal counsel, too. Everything documented, everything by the book. And for the first time in over a decade, I'd be sitting across from my father and his wife, not as their struggling, neglected son, but as the man who owned their future. And this time, they'd be the ones with their backs against the wall. And I hadn't even played my final card yet. I sent the meeting invites out on a Tuesday morning. One to my father, one to Brenda, one to Olivia. The subject line was simple, Redbridge Holdings ownership discussion. I didn't use my name. There was no need. They had no idea I was behind the curtain. And I wasn't ready to step into the spotlight. Not until the final act. The meeting was scheduled for Friday at 4 p.m. The perfect hour. Late enough to ruin their weekend, early enough to leave them stewing in the fallout for days. When they arrived, I was in the conference room, waiting. Leo sat at the head of the table, dressed in his signature charcoal jacket and white tee combo, fingers laced, calm and unreadable. Beside him was our legal counsel, Ava. Sharp, composed, and already flipping through the folder in front of her like she was reading the final chapter of a thriller. She'd already guessed the ending, too. They walked in like they owned the place. Olivia in a beige pantsuit, clutching a leather binder, trying to look important. Brenda in oversized sunglasses and a scarf, even though we were indoors. And my father, worn but trying to stand tall, still wearing that old leather jacket he thought made him look dignified. I recognized every twitch in his face, every mask he wore. They didn't notice me at first. I was at the far end of the table, behind my laptop. I'd intentionally kept my chair turned slightly, facing the skyline through the glass wall. To them, I was probably just another assistant or junior analyst. Until I turned. The moment my face came into view, Brenda froze mid-sentence. Olivia blinked 3 times, jaw tight. My father, he went pale, like he'd just seen a ghost. Ethan, he said, the single word barely a whisper. I didn't answer. Not right away. I wanted them to feel it. The dissonance. The walls closing in. Thank you for coming, Leo said coolly. Let's get started. The next 30 minutes were pure business. Leo walked them through the restructuring plan. Ava presented the compliance documents. They nodded, squirmed, feigned understanding, but I could see it. All of them trying to figure out what I was doing there, why I was at the table, why the air had suddenly changed. When Leo finished outlining the liquidation timeline for non-essential assets, my father finally snapped. Wait, hold on. You're saying we're selling the building? Ava nodded. Correct. As part of the debt recovery strategy. It's the only viable way to satisfy the lien on the property, which you used as collateral. You can't do that. Brenda snapped. That house has been in our family. It hasn't, I said, finally speaking. My voice was calm, cutting through the tension. It was bought 21 years ago in your name and then mortgaged 3 times. Twice to cover Chloe's credit card debt. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish. How do you know that? I smiled. Because I own it now. Silence. What? Olivia whispered, her face a mask of shock. Leo slid a document across the table. As of 2 weeks ago, Mr. Ethan Miller, acting through Redbridge Holdings, acquired a controlling interest in the business, its subsidiaries, and associated assets, including the deed on the office lot and the mortgage lien on the house located at 212 Maplewood Lane. My father looked like he'd been punched. He stammered. I don't understand. You don't have to, I said. Just know this, you're sitting in my building, begging for air in my conference room, and the floor beneath your feet is already slipping. Olivia stood. You're doing this to punish us. I stood too, calm, composed. I'm doing this, I said, because you taught me to be a man who stands on his own. Remember? My father blinked. You said it like it was wisdom, I continued. That men figure it out for themselves. That support is for girls. That I had to earn my worth. I leaned across the table. Well, I did. And now I've earned the right to take everything you thought was untouchable. Brenda muttered something under her breath, probably a curse, but I ignored her. We're offering you a graceful exit, Leo said, his voice even. You can sign over your remaining shares and walk away debt-free, or we can pursue liquidation and foreclosure. Your choice. You're bluffing, Olivia hissed. Ava slid another document across the table. This one stamped by the county. Notice of intent to foreclose. My father reached for it with shaking hands. You do this to your own family, he said hoarsely. I tilted my head. You mean like when you let me sleep in my car? When you gave them everything and told me to figure it out? He didn't answer. Here's what's going to happen, I said. You'll sign the paperwork. You'll leave. You'll lose the house. You'll lose the company. But you'll get to keep your dignity. What little you have left. Because I'm not doing this out of spite. I paused, letting the words sink in. I'm doing it because I've finally accepted that I don't owe you anything. Not love, not loyalty, not mercy. Brenda tried to argue. Olivia slammed her binder shut. My father just sat there, eyes hollow. They signed. When they left, I didn't follow them out. I stayed behind and watched from the window as they walked to the elevator. Slower now. Smaller. It was done. In the months that followed, everything changed. We sold the house. The buyer flipped it within weeks for a profit. I never stepped foot inside, not once. I didn't need to. The company was rebranded, modernized, and merged with a logistics subcontractor. The staff got better benefits. The books were clean. Chloe tried to call once, but I blocked the number. Brenda emailed Leo some legal threat, it went nowhere. Olivia, she disappeared off social media. I heard she moved to another state. Someone told me she was working at a mid-tier PR agency, back to square one. As for my father, I don't know. I don't ask, and I don't care. Because this story wasn't about revenge. Not really. It was about building something they couldn't touch. About choosing myself every single time they didn't. About rising quietly, patiently, until I stood tall enough to look them in the eye and say, we're not the same anymore. And the last thing I ever said to my father was that. Have you ever faced a betrayal so deep it changed the entire course of your life? Or been forced to build your own path from nothing, brick by painful brick? Tell me your story, or let me know, was my final act justified, or did I go too far? Drop your thoughts below, I'm reading everything.